Jake Morrison pushed his food around his plate and stared at the metal walls of his small apartment. The artificial lighting made everything look cold and gray. He had been living on Colony Station Beta 7 for 3 years now, and each day felt exactly the same as the last one. The rejection letter sat on his table, crumpled from when he threw it across the room earlier. Another job application turned down. Another chance to leave this place and do something meaningful with his life gone. Jake picked up the letter and read it again, even though he had memorized every word. Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for your interest in the terraforming program. Unfortunately, we have decided to move forward with other candidates who better match our current needs. We wish you the best in your future endeavors. Jake laughed bitterly. Future endeavors? What future? He was 28 years old and still working the same maintenance job he had taken when he first arrived at the station. He fixed broken air filters, cleaned waste recycling systems, and painted over rust spots on the outer hull. It was honest work, but it was not the life he had dreamed of when he left Earth. He stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into the station's central plaza. People moved through the corridors below, going about their evening routines. Most of them were couples or families. Jake watched a man and woman walk hand in hand toward the recreation center. Behind them, a family with 2 small children headed to the food court. Everyone seemed to have someone. Everyone except him. Jake opened his communication device and scrolled through his contact list. It was embarrassingly short. There was his supervisor, Carl, who only talked to him about work. There was his neighbor, Betty, who sometimes borrowed tools but never stayed to chat. There were a few people from his old job on Earth, but they had all moved on with their lives. Most of them were married now, with children and careers that actually mattered. He thought about calling his sister back on Earth, but she was probably busy with her own family. Besides, what would he say? That he was still stuck in the same dead-end job, still alone, still going nowhere? She would try to cheer him up, tell him things would get better, but they both knew she was just being polite. Jake walked to his small kitchen and opened a beer. Then he opened another one. The alcohol made the loneliness feel a little less sharp, but it also made him think about all the things he was missing. He was almost 30 and he had never been in a serious relationship. He had never owned a home or had children or done anything that would make people remember him after he was gone. The station's evening announcement echoed through the corridors, reminding everyone that quiet hours would begin soon. Jake finished his second beer and opened a third. He rarely drank this much, but tonight felt different. Tonight, the walls of his apartment seemed smaller than usual, and the silence felt heavier. He walked back to the window and looked out at the plaza again. A group of young people laughed as they headed toward the entertainment district. Jake remembered being their age, full of hope and plans for the future. He had believed that joining the colonial expansion program would lead to adventure and purpose. Instead, he had found himself trapped in a routine that never changed. His communication device buzzed. For a moment, his heart jumped, thinking someone might be calling him. But it was just an automated message about scheduled maintenance in his sector tomorrow. Even the machines only contacted him when they needed something fixed. Jake set down his beer and walked to the balcony door. His apartment was on the mid-level of the station, which meant he had a small outdoor space that overlooked the central plaza. The artificial night cycle had begun and the lighting had dimmed to simulate evening on Earth. The plaza was quieter now. With only a few late-shift workers moving through the corridors, he stepped outside and breathed in the recycled air. Even the air on the station was artificial, filtered and processed until it barely felt real. Sometimes Jake wondered if anything about his life was real anymore. He worked in a fake environment, under fake sunlight, breathing fake air, surrounded by people who barely knew his name. The beer made him feel brave and stupid at the same time. He looked down at the plaza and thought about all the people who had someone to go home to. All the people who had found their place in the universe, while he remained stuck in the same spot, doing the same meaningless work, day after day. This is ridiculous, Jake said to himself. I am 28 years old and I have never even been on a real date. He thought about the couples he saw every day, holding hands, sharing meals, planning futures together. He thought about his coworkers, who talked about their families, their children's school performances, their weekend plans with their spouses. He thought about how empty his apartment felt when he came home every night. How quiet it was, how the silence seemed to press against his eardrums. The alcohol made his thoughts feel louder and more dramatic than usual. He imagined himself living the same life for another 10 years, another 20 years, working the same job, eating the same meals alone, spending his evenings watching entertainment programs by himself, while everyone else lived actual lives. Jake walked to the edge of the balcony and looked down at the plaza. The few people below seemed so far away. Everyone seemed far away. He felt like he was watching life happen to other people while he remained frozen in place, unable to connect with anyone or anything. "I cannot keep living like this," he said. Aloud, his voice sounded strange in the quiet air. "I need someone, anyone." The words felt good to say, even if no one was listening. Jake looked up at the artificial sky above the station. Beyond the metal ceiling, he knew there were stars and planets and entire civilizations. Somewhere out there, people were falling in love, starting families, building lives that mattered. "Come on, universe," Jake said, his voice getting louder. "Is that too much to ask? Just one person who might actually want to spend time with me." He thought about his sister's wedding 2 years ago. How happy she had looked, how her husband had gazed at her like she was the most important person in the galaxy. Jake had stood in the back of the ceremony, watching their joy and feeling like an outsider looking in on a life he would never have. The beer made him feel sorry for himself and angry at the same time. He was not a bad person. He worked hard, he was honest, he tried to be kind to people. So why was he so alone? Why did everyone else seem to find their person while he could not even get a second date? Jake gripped the balcony railing and looked down at the empty plaza. The station's acoustic design meant that sounds carried well through the open spaces. Sometimes he could hear conversations from several levels away, laughter from the recreation areas, even arguments from other apartments. "Fine," Jake said, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "If the universe wants to keep me alone, at least it could tell me why." He took a deep breath and felt the alcohol courage building in his chest. This was stupid. This was embarrassing. But he was tired of being quiet, tired of keeping his loneliness to himself, tired of pretending that he was fine with his empty life. Jake cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted into the echoing space of the plaza, "Is there anyone out there who wants to marry me?" His voice carried through the station's corridors, bouncing off metal walls and disappearing into the ventilation systems. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before fading away. Jake immediately felt his face burn with embarrassment. He looked around quickly to see if anyone had heard him, but the plaza remained empty. "Great," he muttered. "Now I am the crazy guy who shouts at the walls." He went back inside and closed the balcony door behind him. The apartment felt even quieter now, as if his outburst had somehow made the silence deeper. Jake finished his beer and went to bed, certain that he had just made a fool of himself and that tomorrow would be exactly the same as every other day. What Jake did not know was that his words had traveled much further than he could have imagined. The station's communication array had been conducting a routine deep space scan at that exact moment, amplifying and broadcasting his desperate call across several light years of space. In the darkness between stars, something ancient and lonely had heard his voice and was already beginning to move toward him. Jake woke up with a headache and the bitter taste of regret in his mouth. He had dreamed about his embarrassing shout from the balcony, and now he had to face another day knowing he had made a fool of himself. He rolled out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom, avoiding his reflection in the mirror. The morning shift started like every other morning. Jake put on his maintenance uniform, grabbed his toolkit, and headed to the work assignment board. His supervisor, Carl, was already there, drinking coffee and looking at his tablet. "Morning, Jake," Carl said without looking up. "You have hull maintenance today. Section C7 through C12. Some of the exterior panels need checking after last week's meteor shower." Jake nodded and took his assignment sheet. Hull work meant putting on a spacesuit and going outside the station. It was one of the more dangerous jobs, but Jake actually preferred it. Outside, he could see the stars and feel like he was part of something bigger than the endless corridors of the station. He made his way to the equipment room and started putting on his spacesuit. The process was routine now, checking every seal and connection. One mistake outside the station could mean death. As he worked, Jake tried not to think about his pathetic cry for companionship the night before. He hoped no one had heard him. "Hey, Jake," called out his coworker Pete from across the room. "You hear about the weird readings last night?" Jake looked up from his helmet seals. "What readings?" The communication array picked up something strange around midnight. Some kind of echo or feedback. The tech guys are scratching their heads about it." Jake felt his stomach drop. His shout had been around midnight. Had the station's equipment somehow picked up his voice? He tried to keep his expression neutral. "Probably just space interference," Jake said, hoping his voice sounded normal. "Happens all the time." Pete shrugged and went back to his own equipment. Jake finished suiting up and made his way to the airlock. The familiar routine of checking pressure seals and oxygen levels helped calm his nerves. Soon he would be outside, away from people and conversations about mysterious signals. The airlock cycled through its sequence, and Jake stepped out onto the station's hull. The view never got old. Stars stretched in every direction, and Earth was visible as a small blue dot in the distance. Out here, his problems seemed smaller. His loneliness felt less important against the vastness of space. Jake made his way to section C7 and started checking the exterior panels. The work was methodical and soothing. He inspected each panel for cracks or damage, tested the seals, and made notes on his tablet. The station rotated slowly, giving him different views of the star field as he worked. He was halfway through section 109 when the proximity alarm started screaming. The sound was so sudden and loud that Jake nearly dropped his tools. Red warning lights flashed on his helmet display, and the station's emergency broadcast system crackled to life in his earpiece. "All personnel to emergency stations. Unknown vessel approaching. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel to emergency stations." Jake looked around frantically, trying to spot the approaching ship. At first, he saw nothing but stars. Then something impossible happened. A section of empty space seemed to ripple like water, and the ship materialized from what had appeared to be nothing. The vessel was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It was sleek and black, about the size of a small cruiser, but it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ship moved with impossible grace, gliding through space without any visible engines or propulsion systems. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Jake fumbled for his communication device. "Control, this is Morrison on hull maintenance. I have visual contact with the unknown vessel." It just appeared out of nowhere. The response came immediately. "Morrison, get inside now. Emergency protocols are in effect." But Jake could not move. He watched in fascination as the strange ship approached the station. It moved like a living thing, flowing through space with organic curves and movements. There were no windows or obvious weapon systems, just smooth black surfaces that seemed to shift and change as he watched. The ship reached the station and began to dock. It attached itself to docking port 7 with movements that were too smooth and coordinated for any human pilot. Jake realized that whatever was flying that ship had reflexes and abilities far beyond normal human capabilities. "Morrison, get your ass inside right now," Carl's voice crackled through the radio. "Commander Park has called a security alert." Jake started moving toward the nearest airlock, but he kept looking back at the mysterious ship. As he watched, a section of the black hull opened like a flower blooming. The opening revealed no airlock or mechanical systems. Just a passage that seemed to lead into soft, dim light. Something emerged from the opening. Someone. Jake stopped moving and stared. The figure was clearly humanoid, but tall and graceful, in a way that seemed impossible. Even from a distance, Jake could see that this was not human. The being moved with fluid motions that made it look like it was dancing rather than walking. The figure stepped directly from the ship onto the station's hull. With no spacesuit or protective equipment, this should have been impossible. The vacuum of space should have killed any living creature instantly. But this being walked across the metal surface like it was taking a stroll through a park, Jake's helmet radio crackled with confused voices from the control room. Control to all stations, the intruder has somehow entered the station. All security teams to level 5. The subject appears to be moving through the corridors without assistance. Jake realized he was still outside, exposed and vulnerable. He forced himself to move toward the airlock, but his eyes kept turning back to the strange ship. As he reached the airlock, he saw the being disappear into the station through what looked like a solid wall. The airlock cycle seemed to take forever. Jake's heart was pounding as he waited for the pressure to equalize. When the inner door finally opened, he stepped into chaos. People were running through the corridors, and security alarms were blaring from every speaker. Jake pulled off his helmet and grabbed the nearest person, a technician named Roy who worked in communications. "What is happening?" Jake asked. Roy looked pale and frightened. "Security teams are reporting system failures. Their weapons are not working. The electronic locks are opening by themselves. Whatever got on the station is moving through the corridors. Like it owns the place?" Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Where is it going?" "That is the weird part," Roy said. "It seems to know exactly where it wants to go, like it has been here before. But that is impossible." Commander Lisa Park's voice echoed through the station's intercom system. "All non-essential personnel return to your quarters immediately. Security teams continue tracking the intruder. We are attempting to establish communication." Jake made his way through the corridors toward his apartment. Other residents were doing the same, their faces showing fear and confusion. No one knew what was happening or what the strange visitor wanted. As Jake reached his level, he noticed that the corridor seemed quieter than usual. The background hum of the station system sounded different, somehow muffled. The lighting seemed dimmer, and there was a strange quality to the air that made his skin tingle. He turned the corner toward his apartment and stopped dead in his tracks. A figure stood in front of his door. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, with pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the artificial light. Her hair was silver white and moved like liquid mercury even though there was no wind. She was beautiful in a way that made Jake's breath catch in his throat, but there was something predatory about her posture that made every instinct in his body scream danger. The woman turned to look at him, and Jake saw her eyes. They were ancient, holding depths that suggested she had seen centuries pass by. Her gaze seemed to look right through him, reading thoughts and memories he had never shared with anyone. When she smiled, Jake saw that her teeth were not entirely human. Her canines were longer and sharper than they should be, and when she moved, her fingernails looked more like claws. "Jake Morrison," she said, and her voice seemed to resonate directly in his mind rather than through his ears. "I heard your call." Jake's mouth went dry. He tried to speak, but no words came out. This impossible being knew his name and was standing outside his apartment like she had been invited. "I am Lyra Voss of the Sanguis dynasty," she continued, her voice carrying an accent he could not identify. "I have traveled very far to answer your question." Jake's mind raced back to the night before, to his desperate shout from the balcony. The question he had screamed into the void. The communication array that had been scanning deep space at exactly that moment. "My question?" Jake managed to whisper. Lyra stepped closer, and Jake caught a scent that was both intoxicating and dangerous. She smelled like night-blooming flowers, and something else he could not identify. Something that made his pulse quicken and his muscles tense for flight. "You asked if there was anyone who wanted to marry you," Lyra said, her ancient eyes never leaving his face. "I heard your call across the void between stars. I heard the loneliness in your voice, the desperate need for connection. I heard a kindred spirit crying out in the darkness." Jake felt his knees go weak. This was impossible. This was insane. Jake stared at Lyra, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The corridor around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of impossible reality. He could hear his own breathing, rapid and shallow, while she stood perfectly still like a statue carved from pale marble. "You are really here," Jake whispered, more to himself than to her. "This is really happening." Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying him with those ancient eyes. "You seem frightened, Jake Morrison. Did you not want someone to answer your call?" Jake tried to think of what to say. Part of him wanted to run, to hide in his apartment and pretend this was all a dream. But another part of him, the part that had been lonely for so long, was fascinated by this impossible woman who had somehow heard his desperate cry across the void of space. "I wanted someone to answer," Jake said carefully. "I just never expected someone like you." Lyra's smile softened, and for a moment she looked less predatory and more genuinely amused. "What did you expect? Another human, perhaps? Someone safe and ordinary?" "I guess I did," Jake admitted. "I never thought about aliens, especially not ones that look like vampires from old stories." "Your old stories contain more truth than your people realize," Lyra said. "Many of the myths and legends from your past are based on real encounters with beings like me. We have been watching your species for a very long time." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Watching us? Why?" "Because you are remarkable," Lyra said simply. "Your people live such brief lives, yet you accomplish so much. You love so deeply, fight so fiercely, and dream so boldly. You face death with courage and explore the unknown with wonder. My people have forgotten how to do these things." She gestured down the corridor. "May we talk somewhere more private? I have much to tell you, and the walls here have many ears." Jake looked around, nervously. The corridor was empty now, but he could hear voices and footsteps from other parts of the station. Commander Park would be looking for the intruder, and security teams would be searching every level. "They are looking for you," Jake said. "The station commander has called a security alert." Lyra laughed, and the sound was like silver bells mixed with something darker. "Your security teams cannot find me unless I wish to be found. Their weapons do not work in my presence, and their electronic systems obey my will rather than theirs. But I prefer not to frighten them more than necessary." She stepped closer to Jake, and he caught that intoxicating scent again. "I came here for you, Jake Morrison. I have no interest in your station or your people, only in the man who called out to the stars with such honest longing." Jake's apartment door opened at Lyra's approach, though he had not given her the access code. She walked inside like she owned the place, moving with that fluid grace that made her seem to float rather than walk. Jake followed her, his mind still struggling to accept what was happening. "Your home is modest," Lyra observed, looking around the small apartment. "But it feels lived in, human. There is something comforting about spaces that show the mark of daily life." She walked to the window that overlooked the plaza and gazed out at the artificial sky. "On my ship, everything is perfect and unchanging. Nothing breaks down or wears out. Nothing shows the passage of time. Sometimes I think that is why my people are dying." Jake stood by the door, unsure whether to sit down or remain standing. "Dying, but you said you were immortal." "Immortal does not mean immune to death," Lyra said, turning away from the window. "It means we do not age and die naturally. But we can still be killed, and more importantly, we can still fade away from loneliness and despair." She sat down on Jake's small couch, and he noticed that she moved with careful precision, as if she was not used to furniture designed for smaller beings. "My people, the Sanguis, have been traveling the galaxy for thousands of years. We are ancient beyond your understanding, but we are also dying out." "How many of you are there?" Jake asked, finally sitting down across from her. "Fewer than 1,000, Lyra said sadly. "Once we numbered in the millions. We ruled star systems and commanded fleets that could destroy planets. But power without purpose is meaningless, and immortality without love is a curse." Jake tried to wrap his mind around what she was telling him. "What happened to your people?" "We became too perfect," Lyra said. "We lived so long that we stopped growing, stopped changing, stopped feeling deeply about anything. We fed on other species but never truly connected with them. We became observers rather than participants in life. She stood up and walked to Jake's small kitchen, examining the simple appliances with curiosity. Your people fascinate me because you are the opposite of what we became. You live for such a short time, yet you burn so brightly. You feel everything so intensely. You risk everything for love, for dreams, for the simple hope that tomorrow might be better than today. Jake watched her move around his apartment, touching things with the careful attention of someone experiencing them for the first time. Is that why you came here? Because you heard me feeling sorry for myself? Lyra turned to face him, and her expression was more serious than he had seen before. I came here because I heard something in your voice that I recognized. The same loneliness that has been eating at my soul for centuries. The same desperate need for connection that has driven me to wander the galaxy in search of something I thought I would never find. She walked back to him and knelt down so that they were at eye level. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the artificial light, and Jake could see flecks of silver in her ancient eyes. I have been alone for 300 years, Jake Morrison. I have watched from the shadows as your species spread across the stars. I have seen your wars and your peace treaties, your failures and your triumphs, but I have never made contact with any of you because I believed you were too different from us. Jake felt his mouth go dry. What changed your mind? Your call, Lyra said simply. When I heard you shout into the void, asking if anyone wanted to marry you, I realized that loneliness is universal. Pain is universal. The need for connection transcends species and cultures and the vast distances between stars. She reached out and took his hand in hers. Her skin was cold but somehow comforting, and Jake could feel a strange energy flowing between them. I have come to make you an offer, Jake Morrison, an offer that could change both of our lives forever. Jake's heart started pounding again. What kind of offer? Marriage, Lyra said, her voice steady and serious. A true union between our species. Not just a symbolic gesture, but a real bond that would create something new. Something that has never existed before. Jake stared at her in shock. You want to marry me, but we just met. You do not even know me. I know enough, Lyra said. I know that you are lonely like I am. I know that you dream of adventure and purpose. I know that you have a good heart and a brave spirit. I can sense these things about you. She stood up and walked to the window again, looking out at the stars beyond the artificial sky. A union between our species would create children who combine the best of both our natures. They would have human creativity and passion, but also sanguine longevity and abilities. They would be bridge builders between worlds. Jake felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Children? You're talking about having children with me? If you're willing, Lyra said. The process would be difficult and dangerous. There are members of my own species who would see such a union as an abomination. They would try to stop us, possibly by force. She turned back to him, and Jake saw something vulnerable in her ancient eyes. But I have lived for centuries without hope, Jake Morrison. When I heard your call, I felt something I had not felt in 300 years. I felt the possibility of a future worth living. Jake stood up and walked to her, drawn by something he could not name. What would happen to me? Would I become like you? You would become something new, Lyra said. Not fully human, but not fully sanguine either. You would live much longer than normal humans, but you would retain your humanity, your capacity for growth and change and deep feeling. She reached out and touched his face again, and Jake felt that strange energy flow. Between them, I offer you adventure, Jake Morrison. I offer you purpose and love and a life that matters. But I also offer you danger and uncertainty and a path that no one has ever walked before. Jake looked into her eyes and saw centuries of loneliness and pain, but also hope and determination. This impossible woman had traveled across space to answer his desperate call. She was offering him everything he had ever dreamed of, but at a price he could not yet understand. I need time to think, Jake said finally. Lyra nodded. Of course. This is not a decision to make lightly, but know that time is not unlimited. My people will discover that I am here soon. When they do, they will come for me, and they will not be as gentle as I am." She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. "I will wait for your answer, Jake Morrison. But while you decide, remember that some chances come only once in a lifetime, even a very long lifetime." The door closed behind her, and Jake was left alone in his apartment with the lingering scent of night-blooming flowers and the echo of impossible promises. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars, wondering if his life would ever be the same again. Jake could not sleep that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Lyra's impossible offer. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her ancient face and felt the strange energy that had flowed between them when she touched. His hand, marriage to an alien vampire, children who would be something entirely new. A life of adventure and danger among the stars. It sounded like a fantasy, but the lingering scent in his apartment proved it had been real. She had been here. She had offered him everything he had ever wanted, and now he had to decide if he was brave enough to take it. Jake got up and made coffee, then sat by his window watching the artificial sunrise begin. The station's lighting gradually shifted from night blue to morning yellow, simulating the dawn that people on planets took for granted. He wondered what a real sunrise would look like on Lyra's world, if she even had a world to call home. His communication device buzzed with a message from his supervisor. "Morrison, report to Commander Park's office immediately. Do not speak to anyone about yesterday's incident until after your debriefing." Jake's stomach tightened. The security investigation was starting, and he was probably the only person who had actually seen the intruder up close. He could not tell them the truth about Lyra, but he would have to say something. He dressed quickly and made his way to the command center. The corridors were buzzing with activity as security teams continued their search. Jake heard fragments of conversation as he passed other station personnel. "The sensors showed nothing," one technician was saying to another. "Like the ship was invisible until it wanted to be seen." "My cousin works in security," someone else whispered. "He said their weapons just stopped working, all of them at the same time." Jake reached Commander Park's office and knocked on the door. Lisa Park was a tough woman in her 50s who had been running Colony Station Beta 7 for over a decade. She had dealt with pirates, equipment failures, and diplomatic crises, but Jake could see that yesterday's events had shaken her. "Morrison, sit down," Commander Park said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I understand you were on hull maintenance when the unknown vessel arrived. Tell me exactly what you saw." Jake took a deep breath and tried to stick as close to the truth as possible. "I was checking exterior panels in Section C9 when the proximity alarms went off. I looked around and saw empty space, then suddenly there was a ship. It seemed to appear out of nothing." "Describe the ship," Commander Park said, making notes on her tablet. "Black, about cruiser size, but shaped differently than anything I have seen before. It moved without any visible engines. Very smooth, like it was flowing through space instead of flying." Commander Park nodded grimly. "Our sensors confirmed that description." "What happened next?" "It docked at Port 7. Something came out of the ship and walked across the hull. No spacesuit, no protection. That should have been impossible." "Did you see what this being looked like?" Commander Park asked. Jake hesitated. He could not describe Lyra without revealing too much. "Humanoid. Tall, it moved strangely, like it was not affected by gravity the same way we are." Commander Park set down her tablet and looked at Jake seriously. "Morrison, what I'm about to tell you is classified. This incident goes far beyond our station's security. We have been in contact with Earth Command, and they are sending a fleet to investigate." Jake felt his heart sink. "A fleet?" "The technology we witnessed yesterday is beyond anything in human records. A ship that can appear from nowhere, beings that can survive in vacuum, the ability to disable our weapons and override our security systems. Earth Command considers this a potential threat to human space." Commander Park stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the docking bays where Lyra's ship sat like a black shadow. "There's something else, Morrison. Long-range sensors are detecting other ships approaching our position, lots of them." Jake's mouth went dry. "More ships like the first one?" "We think so." They are still several hours away, but they are definitely heading here. Whatever came to our station yesterday, it seems to have friends. Jake excused himself from the debriefing as quickly as possible and headed back to his quarters. His mind was racing. Other Sanguis ships were coming, probably looking. For Lyra, she had warned him that her people would not approve of her actions. Now it looked like he was about to be caught in the middle of an interstellar conflict. He found Lyra waiting in his apartment again, sitting calmly on his couch as if she belonged there. She looked up when he entered, and he could see tension in her ancient eyes that had not been there before. "You know they are coming," Jake said. It was not a question. "Yes," Lyra replied simply. "The Council of Shadows has sensed my presence here. They are not pleased that I have made contact with your species." Jake sat down across from her, trying to process the implications. "How many ships?" 50, perhaps more. "A significant portion of our remaining fleet." Lyra's voice was calm, but Jake could hear the worry underneath. "They are led by Darius Knox, who was once my mate." "Your mate?" Jake felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy. "We were together for over 2 centuries, Lyra explained. "But like all Sanguis relationships, ours grew cold and distant as the years passed. We became strangers sharing the same existence. I left him 50 years ago to search for something more meaningful." She stood up and walked to the window, her pale reflection ghost-like in the glass. "Darius never understood my fascination with younger species. He believes that Sanguis are superior to all other life forms and that contact with lesser beings is beneath us. What will he do when he gets here?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "He will demand that I return with him," Lyra said. "When I refuse, he will try to take me by force. He will see you and your people as obstacles to be removed." Jake felt cold dread spreading through his chest. He would attack the station? Darius is ancient and powerful, even by Sanguis standards. He remembers when we ruled star systems through fear and strength. He has no respect for human life. Lyra turned back to Jake, her expression serious. "He would destroy this entire station to prevent what he sees as contamination of our bloodline." Jake stood up abruptly. "I have to warn Commander. Park, the station needs to evacuate." "Your weapons cannot harm us, Jake," Lyra said gently. "Your ships are too slow to escape. And there is nowhere in human space that Darius cannot find you if he chooses to hunt you." Jake felt helpless and angry. "Then what can we do? Just wait here for him to kill us all?" Lyra walked to him and took his hands in hers. "There is one way to stop this. One way to make Darius respect your people and accept our union." "What way?" "You must challenge him to single combat." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "Challenge him? You just said he is ancient and powerful." "I am a maintenance worker with no combat training. Sanguis law is very old and very strict," Lyra explained. "If you invoke the right of challenge from my hand, Darius cannot refuse. It is a matter of honor that goes back thousands of years." Jake pulled his hands away from hers. "That is suicide. You are asking me to fight a vampire who has lived for centuries." "I am asking you to trust in what makes humans special," Lyra said. "Darius is powerful, but he is also predictable. He has fought the same way for so long that he cannot imagine new approaches. You have something he does not. What is that?" "Adaptability." "Creativity?" "The ability to think of solutions that have never been tried before." Lyra's eyes were intense as she spoke. "Your people survive and thrive because you can change and grow in ways that ancient beings cannot." Jake shook his head. "Even if I could somehow beat him, why would that solve anything? 50 ships full of angry vampires would still be out there." "Because Sanguis respects strength above all else," Lyra said. "If a human could defeat one of our greatest warriors, it would prove that your species deserves to be treated as equals, rather than cattle. It would change how my people see humanity forever." Jake walked to his small kitchen and grabbed a bottle of water, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "There has to be another way." "There is no other way," Lyra said firmly. "Darius will arrive in a few hours. He will demand my return and threaten your station. Unless you challenge him, Thousands of humans will die for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jake drank his water and tried to imagine himself fighting an ancient alien warrior. It seemed impossible, like something from a movie rather than real life. But he thought about Commander Park and Carl and all the other people on the station who had no idea what was coming for them. "If I do this," Jake said slowly, "if I challenge him and somehow win, what happens then?" "Then you and I would be free to marry," Lyra said. "The council would have to accept our union as legitimate. Our children would be recognized as a new branch of the Sanguis family tree." Jake set down his water bottle and looked at this impossible woman who had entered his life and turned everything upside down. 2 days ago, his biggest worry had been whether to apply for another job transfer. Now he was being asked to fight for the future of human-alien relations. "How long do I have to decide?" Jake asked. "Darius will be here in 3 hours, Lyra said. "The challenge must be issued before he takes any hostile action against your station." Jake walked to his window and looked out at the bustling plaza below. The Sanguis fleet arrived exactly when Lyra had predicted. Jake watched from the observation deck as 50 black ships materialized from empty space, surrounding Colony Station Beta 7 like predators circling their prey. Each vessel was larger than Lyra's ship, and they moved with the same impossible grace that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Commander Park's voice echoed through the station intercom, trying to maintain calm while ordering all personnel to emergency stations. The Earth Defense Fleet was still hours away, and everyone knew that whatever happened next would be decided long before help arrived. Jake stood in the station's main hangar bay, wearing his maintenance coveralls and carrying the simple tools he had requested for the fight. Lyra had tried to convince him to use more sophisticated weapons, but Jake had a plan that required him to appear as harmless as possible. "You do not have to do this," Lyra said one more time. "We could try to hide somewhere in human space until the council loses interest." "Darius would never stop hunting us," Jake replied, checking his tool belt one last time. "You said so yourself. This is the only way to protect the station and give our future a real chance." The hangar bay doors opened with a sound like thunder, and Darius Knox entered the station. He was even more imposing than Jake had imagined. Nearly 8 feet tall, with skin like polished marble and eyes that burned with the fire of dying stars. His hair was black as the void between galaxies, and when he moved, the air itself seemed to bend around him. Behind Darius came a dozen other Sanguis warriors, each one radiating the same ancient power and predatory grace. They formed a semicircle around the hangar bay, their eyes fixed on Lyra with expressions of disapproval and barely controlled anger. "Lyra Voss," Darius said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "you have disgraced our bloodline by consorting with these cattle. You will return with me now, and we will never speak of this shame again." Lyra stepped forward, her chin raised in defiance. "I will not return, Darius. I have found something here that our people lost long ago. I have found hope." Darius's eyes flicked to Jake with dismissive contempt. "Hope in this weak creature? He is nothing but a mayfly, here for a moment and then gone. What hope could such a brief existence possibly offer?" "The hope of change," Lyra said firmly. "The hope of growth and love and a future worth building. Things that our people have forgotten in their pursuit of empty perfection." Darius laughed, and the sound was like ice cracking in the depths of space. "You speak of love as if it matters." "Love is weakness, Lyra. It makes beings vulnerable and foolish. It is better to be strong and alone than weak and attached." Jake stepped forward, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Darius Knox, I challenge you to single combat for the right to marry Lyra Voss." The entire hangar bay fell silent. Even the other Sanguis warriors looked surprised. Darius stared at Jake as if he could not believe what he had just heard. "You dare?" Darius said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried clearly across the space. "You dare challenge me, mortal? I have lived for over 2,000 years. I have destroyed armies and conquered worlds. You are nothing but dust. Compared to my power? Maybe," Jake said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "But I am dust that refuses to blow away. I invoke the ancient laws of your people. You cannot refuse my challenge." Darius's face twisted with rage and something that might have been amusement. "Very well, little human, I accept your challenge. When I am finished with you, your broken body will serve as an example to any other humans who think to reach above their station." The other Sanguis warriors moved back to form a fighting circle. Jake noticed that they seemed genuinely curious about how the battle would unfold. Probably most of them had never seen a human fight before, let alone challenge one of their greatest. "Warriors, the rules are simple," Darius announced. "Combat continues until death or submission. Any weapons or tactics are permitted. There will be no mercy and no second chances?" Jake nodded and pulled a hammer from his tool belt. It was a simple maintenance tool, designed for adjusting hull panels and making basic repairs. Compared to the elegant weapons the Sanguis carried, it looked primitive and crude. Darius smiled, revealing fangs that were longer and sharper than Lyra's. "You plan to fight me with a hammer? This will be over quickly." The fight began without warning. Darius moved faster than Jake's eyes could follow, crossing the distance between them in the blink of an eye. But Jake had been expecting this. He dove to the side, rolling behind a stack of cargo containers as Darius's claws raked the air where his head had been moments before. "You cannot run forever, human," Darius called out, his voice echoing through the hangar bay. "I can hear your heartbeat. I can smell your fear. There is nowhere to hide." Jake stayed low and moved between the cargo containers, using the hangar's layout to his advantage. Darius was faster and stronger, but he was also used to fighting in open spaces against opponents who relied on similar tactics. The cluttered environment of the hangar was unfamiliar territory. Jake reached into his tool belt and pulled out a magnetic coupling device. It was designed to temporarily fuse metal surfaces together for emergency repairs. He attached it to the side of a cargo container and activated the electromagnet inside. Darius appeared around the corner of the container, moving with predatory grace. But as he passed the hidden device, his metallic belt buckle was suddenly yanked sideways by the powerful magnet. The unexpected pull threw off his balance for just a fraction of a second. It was the opening Jake had been waiting for. He swung his hammer with all his strength, connecting with Darius's knee. The ancient warrior stumbled but did not fall. Instead, he spun around with a snarl of rage and backhanded Jake across the hangar bay. Jake hit the wall hard and tasted blood in his mouth. His ribs felt like they were on fire, and his vision blurred for a moment. But he forced himself to get up. This was only the beginning. "Clever," Darius admitted, advancing slowly. "You use tools and tricks because you lack true strength. But cleverness will not save you when I tear out your throat." Jake wiped blood from his mouth and smiled. "Maybe not, but I have got more tricks than you think." He pulled a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. Suddenly, the hangar bay's artificial gravity began to fluctuate wildly. Jake had spent hours studying the station's systems, and he knew exactly which controls to override. Darius was thrown off balance as gravity shifted from normal to half strength to zero. He had spent centuries fighting in stable conditions, and the constant changes in gravitational pull disrupted his movement patterns. Jake, meanwhile, had trained for zero-gravity repairs and was used to working in unstable environments, using the gravitational chaos as cover. Jake launched himself across the hangar bay with a magnetic grappling hook he had borrowed from the emergency equipment locker. He swung around behind Darius and struck him in the back with a plasma torch set to its highest setting. The torch burned through Darius's clothing and seared his skin. The ancient warrior roared in pain and anger, spinning around to grab Jake. But Jake was already moving again, using momentum and physics to stay one step ahead of his much stronger opponent. "This is impossible," Darius snarled, his perfect composure finally cracking. "You are just a human. You should not be able to touch me." "That is your problem," Jake said, breathing hard but still moving. "You think being old makes you better. But sometimes being young means you can learn new tricks." The fight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Jake used every tool in his belt, every system in the hangar bay, and every dirty trick he could think of. He could not match Darius's speed or strength, but he could be unpredictable in ways the ancient warrior had never encountered. Finally, Jake saw his chance. Darius had been steadily getting more frustrated and angry, making his attacks wilder and less controlled. When the warrior lunged forward in a final, overwhelming assault, Jake was ready. He activated the emergency airlock controls, opening a small section of the outer hull. The sudden decompression created a powerful wind that pulled everything toward the opening. Darius, caught in mid-lunge, was yanked off balance and slammed into the wall beside the airlock. Jake used the same wind to propel himself forward, his hammer raised high. This time, his strike connected with Darius's temple, and the ancient warrior finally fell to the deck, unconscious but not dead. The hangar bay fell silent except for the sound of Jake's labored breathing. He stood over Darius's still form, the hammer trembling in his hands. The other Sanguis warriors stared at him in amazement, as if they could not believe what they had just witnessed. "It is done," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I claim victory." One of the other Sanguis stepped forward, an ancient female with silver hair and eyes like molten gold. "By the old laws, the human has proven his worth. Darius Knox has been defeated in honorable combat." She looked at Jake with something that might have been respect. "Your species is more remarkable than we believed, human. You have shown that. Strength comes in many forms." Lyra rushed to Jake's side, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "You did it, you actually did it." Jake dropped his hammer and took her hands in his. "I told you I would fight for us." The silver-haired Sanguis approached them both.